All right, for more, we are joined by Brandon Yoder. He's a senior lecturer at the School of Politics and International Relations at Australian National University. He is speaking to us from Singapore this morning. Brandon, as we just heard there from their report, a starkly different assessment of the border issue by both sides. China saying it's stable, while India is maintaining it's not. I mean, what's your take on the conflicting views, and how worried should we be of a risk of a dangerous escalation?
Well, I think the main reason for the conflicting views is that China holds the tactical upper hand on the ground in the border region, and so it's in China's interest, and China desires a maintenance of that status quo in terms of the distribution of power there, and would like to maintain that leverage. And so they have every interest in saying everything's good. We want to maintain good relations with India, which they do. Because that's very important to China in its current growing geopolitical rivalry with the United States. And so China has every incentive to try to downplay this. India, on the other hand, is dissatisfied that China has this leverage in the Himalayan border region, and would like to be able to put deterrent pressure on China, to let China know that it can't simply continue to make these kinds of incursions to encroach on India's what India claims as its sovereign territory. So I see India telling China, look, if you continue to rock the boat, India is not going to simply lie down and do what it has in the past, which is to kind of echo China in downplaying the tensions and trying to preserve the broader bilateral relationship. India is trying to say, no, this is going to actually cause major problems that China can't afford right now. And so China has to back off despite having the tactical advantage on the ground in the region.
Is that what we've been seeing over the last few years then? Because since the 2020 Galwan crisis, India has prioritized economic engagement with other partners, including recent free trade negotiations with the European Union and the United Kingdom, as well as the resilient supply chain initiative with Japan and Australia. Is that the leverage that you're referring to?
Yeah, so that's definitely part of it. Yeah, so India sees China as a security threat, and not only on the border, but more broadly in the region. They have a burgeoning geopolitical rivalry of their own in the Indian Ocean and with states on India's border. So they're jockeying for influence there as well. So there are multiple security issues at stake in China-India relations. And so India, naturally, when facing a geopolitical rival that's increasingly seen as having hostile intentions, India wants to reduce its economic dependence on China and to create security hedges. So we see things like these new attempts to diversify its economic portfolio so that it's got other trading partners to reduce its dependence on Beijing, and as well as security partnerships like the Quad that India is increasingly leaning into.
All right, and speaking of one of geopolitical security issues, the Russia-Ukraine war has certainly brought Moscow much closer into Beijing's orbit. Brandon, how much of a concern is this development for India, and how likely would New Delhi move to cool its ties with Russia as the U.S. steps in?
Yeah, so it's a major concern. India really doesn't want Moscow to move more into Beijing's orbit, because that, for the same geopolitical reasons we were talking about, that increases China's leverage over Russia. And so India has both economic and security partnerships with Russia, and especially on the security side, a lot of India's weapons come from Russian producers. And so, as well as a lot of India's energy comes from is acquired very cheaply from Russian sources. And so, India doesn't want China to be able to use Russia as leverage against India in China and India's bilateral disputes. So, this is very concerning to India. They don't want Russia to become increasingly ensnared in China's orbit. And then there was another point that that if you could repeat, I'd love to speak to.
How likely will New Delhi move to cool its ties with Russia as the U.S. steps in?
I think India is very resistant to that, and they've done a great job going all the way back to the Cold War of resisting any kind of pressure from either the United States or Russia/Soviet Union to choose one side or the other. India's done a really good job of playing both sides throughout its entire history. And maintaining a neutral position, so it would be very difficult to see them succumbing to U.S. pressure, and so far they haven't. I mean, this is borne out in what India's actual policy has been, and the U.S. wants to maintain good relations with India because of the U.S.-China rivalry, and so the U.S. isn't going to pressure India as much as it could because it needs India's help in containing China's rise in East Asia. So I think the status quo is quite stable, that India is going to continue to maintain its relationships with Russia that benefit India, and the U.S. will not pressure India in a way that will alter India's policies there.
So going forward then, say 6 months to a year, how do you see this relationship playing out? More of the same?
More of the same. I could see China making minor concessions. I mean, I think a lot of the underlying issues here are image and status based and get to domestic politics, and so even token concessions, which I think, depending on how things go in the war in Ukraine and with China-U.S. relations, China might be inclined to try to soften its line toward India and try to get India on board with the line that the Chinese leadership has taken, that the relationship is normal. But what happened, this most recent incident 7 months ago underscores that hasn't happened yet. And if it does happen, there's no particular time frame on when it would happen. So yeah, I think the status quo seems like for the foreseeable future it will hold.
Okay, thank you very much for your time and your perspectives this morning. Brandon Yoder there, Senior Lecturer from the School of Politics and International Relations at Australian National University.